Alright guys, Mr. Eskew here. We're going to be dealing with compounds containing polyatomic ions, continuing our theme on nomenclature in chemistry. We've dealt with type 1s, type 2s, and type 3s. Now, you've been memorizing these polyatomic ions, and now we're actually going to learn how to name the formulas where they're used. Alright guys, we need to get out our handy-dandy nomenclature notebooks, and we're going to start on 2 new pages. The left side is where we should be now, and we're going to write the title here, compounds containing polyatomic ions, and then we're going to put our first bullet being that the name of the polyatomic compounds, you name them by naming the cation first and then the anion second, and that should sound real familiar. Alright, so if the compound has a polyatomic ion in it, we basically do it the same way we've been doing in type 1, type 2, type 3, only we're going to be using the name of our polyatomic ions in our nomenclature. Now when we name compounds containing polyatomic ions, keep in mind we're going to be consistent with what we did in type 1 and type 2. We're going to take the cation, which is always going to be a metal, and we're going to name that compound based upon what type it is, a type 1 or type 2. In other words, is it fixed or is it variable? So just so we understand, the metal right here is your cation. Just review, name the cation, then name the anion, then you've named the compound. Alright guys, in your handy dandy nomenclature notebook, this, being consistent, should be on the right page, right side of your notebook. We've got our examples here. We're going to have 3. This is our first one, Na2SO4. Now to begin with, you as a good chemistry student should realize that what we're dealing with here is a polyatomic ion, and this was the critical part about memorization. If you can't recognize that SO4, then you're in real trouble trying to name this. You just flat have to know that that's a sulfate. All right, and then we take a look at this. We look at our, looking at the left side over here at our rules. We're going to name the cation and then the anion. Well, here's our cation, sodium, and we notice that sodium happens to be in group 1. That means it has a fixed charge, so we're going to use type 1 nomenclature. Type 1 nomenclature says we're going to name sodium as the cation, and then we're going to name the polyatomic ion, sulfate. And that's how we name this compound. Alright guys, here we go with our second example. We're going to use this particular formula, Fe, and then we're going to have NO3, and there's 3 of them. Alright, to begin with, as a good chemistry student, we understand immediately that we're working with a polyatomic ion. This one happens to be what? Yeah, that's right, nitrate. Okay. Then we got to deal with our metal. We see that this cation is not in group 1, it's not in group 2, it's not silver, zinc, or aluminum. So consequently, we're going to use a Roman numeral because we have to indicate the charge. And this gets us back to what we talked about, that all compounds are electrically neutral, so their charges have to total up to 0. Well, what's the charge? Well, we memorized that a nitrate polyatomic ion has an extra electron, so it has a charge of -1. But instead of just one of them, we have 3 nitrates. It sort of looks like this right here. So our total negative charge happens to be 3, and of course, to be neutral, we have to have a +3 there. Well, given the fact that there's only one iron available, Fe was iron, then that has to supply the entire charge. And you remember with type 2, that is what our Roman numerals represent. So staying consistent, we're going to go ahead and put our Roman numeral down. That's our charge, and then we just simply name it. Of course, Fe is iron, and NO3, and this is why you had to memorize these, you wouldn't be able to name it otherwise, is nitrate. That's our second example right there. Alright guys, go ahead and write all this down. I'll wait a little bit and let you get that down, then we'll talk about the explanation. Second example here. All right, guys, our third and last example is going to be NH4 ClO3. That's what we're going to call it right there. All right, so we take a look at this, and hopefully at this point in time, we should be able to recognize almost immediately that we're dealing with the one positive cation that we've memorized, and that happens to be ammonium. And then hopefully we were recognizing this one, ClO3, that happened to be chlorate. So the nomenclature simply is this, like we have over in our notes. You just name the cation. In this case, it happens to be ammonium. And then you name the anion, which happens to be chlorate. These are really easy to name if you have memorized your polyatomic ions. If you're not recognizing these, then you're in real trouble and it becomes virtually impossible to name these compounds correctly. So we have ammonium nitrate as our third and last example. Now clearly, guys, we're going to do some practice problems, aren't we?